Now let's dive into the fascinating world of interfaces. And in this video, I want to just talk generally about what interfaces are and help you understand them, because this is a very slippery place for a lot of newcomers to programming and a surprising number of people who've been around C# coding for a while, because interfaces are one of those things that kind of hard to get a grasp on when you would use them and why you would use them. A lot of people are using them and not really understanding the significance of them, so let's just kind of work through that. Now, utilizing an interface is very similar to inheritance with two major differences. The first one being that the interface requires that all methods that are laid out in the interface are implemented in the class that's inheriting the interface. And we'll talk about terminology in just a couple of minutes here. Now, the interface does not provide any implementation code for the methods. And some of you are thinking, sounds an awful lot like an abstract class. Well, just hang on and you'll see here. Now, the big question that you always get, especially in live training situations or from people who see interfaces for the first time, the question is always, exactly what problem is this solving for me? And the bottom line is there's a lot of different things you can do with interfaces, but it really all starts with just kind of seeing one work and then getting in a situation that'll finally dawn on you, hey, wait a minute, that clown was talking about interfaces, and that's exactly what I probably need here, something that functions like those things do. So an interface establishes the functionality that a class must provide. This gives us commonality, the same structure, the same method names in the different classes. It does not establish what the functionality is. And the bottom line is an interface separates the what's being done from how to do it. Okay, or how to call it. So it's really decoupling the different aspects of our application, which becomes even more important later on, and we'll talk about that with delegates and events and so forth. Now, just a general convention thing out there, according to Microsoft, all interfaces should begin with a capital I when you name them. You'll see that later. Now, how did we get interfaces in C# and why do we lean on them so much? Well, C# does not allow a class to inherit from multiple classes. Why? When C# was being developed, the guys who were doing that decided, wait a minute, a lot of other C languages, you can have multiple inheritance, you can have multiple base class inheritance. That starts to get ugly and complicated and tough to manage when you have conflicting method names in those two base classes and so forth. So the decision was made with C#. C# can only inherit from one class, but it can inherit from multiple interfaces. And I'll show you an example of that later on in code. Now, when we use multiple interfaces, and we inherit those into a class, we can provide some really powerful polymorphism functionality in our application where different interfaces can implement the same method names, and then different classes can implement the same interface and provide very different implementations of what's happening all the time while calling the same method name. Good example. If I've got a company and we need to prepare invoices, some of them are for in-house functionality, some are for external vendors, some might even be some other situation, okay? But the bottom line is we want to prepare an invoice for these three very distinct people. The invoices are prepared three distinct different ways from three different databases or whatever. Our interface can name the methods that are being called to generate this invoice data. However, the interface is inherited into different classes, and each class provides its own implementation based on what's happening. But from our main code that's calling it, we just simply call the method that starts the process of pulling our invoice information. This, again, we're decoupling the functionality from our actual client-side code that's causing it to happen. Now, you'll see more of that later. Interfaces can declare 0 or more methods, properties, events, and indexers. Now, you can have as many of these as you want. You don't have to have any. And we're going to work totally in our examples with methods just to make it easier. If you can get your head around that, you can go the next step. Implementing an interface, just so you'll know, out there in the real world and in documentation, is also referred to as interface inheritance or inheriting an interface. It's all the same thing. Implementing, inheriting, it all means the same thing with an interface. And so I'm going to look at an example of this in a separate video entitled Interface Example. Could be a two-parter if I talk too long and explain too much or type too slow. So just look for Interface Example. You'll see either a one or a two-part video, and we'll look at some code on this, and that'll really kind of help turn the light on or refresh your memory on some things you need to be familiar with for the exam.